Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Good? Okay. Everyone is here for the aging research, past, present, and future? Yes? Okay, great. Good morning and welcome. My name is Dr. Kimson Johnson, and I'm a second year postdoctoral research fellow here at the ISR Survey Research Center. I, along with Dr. Kate Duchowny, a research assistant professor in the Social Environment and Health program, also here at the ISR Survey Research Center, will be moderating this session. Today, our speakers will discuss aspects of the past, present, and future of aging research, with each speaker focusing on one of these specific areas. After each speaker, we will have a brief Q&A session, followed by an additional Q&A session after our final speaker. During that time, you're welcome to come to the microphone, and we are also happy to bring the microphone to you. So now we'll introduce our first speaker. Dr. Toni C. Antonucci is the Elizabeth M. Duvon Collegiate Professor of Psychology, Program Director and Research Professor in the Life Course Development Program at the Institute for Social Research, all at the University of Michigan. Her research focuses on social relations and health, physical, psychological, cognitive functioning across the lifespan. Professor Antonucci's research examines close social relations, peer and family relations, caregiving, and social media. She is interested in family multi-generational relations, child and adult development. Further, Professor Antonucci has conducted comparative studies on social relations and health internationally and has served in leadership positions in several national and international professional organizations.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Oh, yay, good. First, I want to thank Jessica and Coulter for that lovely introduction to the day. It was like, I've been here a long time and I still love listening to all those things. And I thought they did a great job. So I want to talk about aging research, the past, because we're going to have the present and the future. I don't want you to think we're stuck in the past. Neither am I. First, I'll tell you a little bit about me. For those of you who I don't know, I'm a lifespan developmental psychologist. There aren't really that many psychologists in the building. Well, they're in SRC. There are a bunch in RCGD, but for psychologists, we're still a rarity, but we shouldn't be here in SRC. And I think we have a lot to contribute. And you'll hear it in slight differences in the way we approach stuff. But some of my best friends, as they say, are sociologists and people of other disciplines, which I really think is very important about the way we approach things. Even when Jessica and Coulter were talking about some of the classic studies like PSID, I was thinking about sitting around with Jim Morgan, who was the original PI, talking with people of different disciplines. And he, for those of you who don't know him, he's a very distinctive guy, really tall. He liked to wear bow ties, and he talked a mile a minute. And he had a certain humility, like many of the old guys. Now I'm one of the old guys, but one of the old guys had, where he would say, I remember him saying this very distinctly, I have about 100 ideas a minute. If one's good, I'm grateful. There was just that lovely open spirit. But anyway, very few psychologists. I think we should have more, but what can you do? I did do a master's in aging and a PhD in infancy, which I only mentioned to say that lifespan developmental psychology didn't come to me late in life. And I really, really thought that it was a good way to think developmentally. Okay, I'm interested in different kinds of relationships. Kim talked about that. And I think what I'd like to think of as one of the most important contributions was to think about social relations as something you could study scientifically, not just casually. People would say, like, are you married? I remember having a conversation with Jim House, who thought, a long, long time ago, about all you have to do is ask people if they're married and then you're done. I'm like, Jim, what about people who are not happily married? What about people who don't talk to their spouse? Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, you can see we had a lot of work to do. Okay, when I came here in 1970, there was no research on aging at ISR. And in fact, people thought it was an awful area to study. It's like, studying leprosy. Who wants to study that? You might catch it. And then in the 1980s, really, the country figured out that we're all getting older. It was a revolutionary discovery. But about that time, we learned that we could predict who was going to get old. Go figure, because they started out young. And if they didn't die, they got to be old. And then NIA, which is the National Institute on Aging, was created, which, we had some really early close ties. So Bob Butler, who was one of the first directors, and Matilda Wright Riley, who should have been the first director, but wasn't because she didn't want to be. So she got Bob Butler to do it. So and those people were friendly with the people here at ISR. So we had an early connection. So you might wonder how people got to pay attention to aging, and then that's what this means. Have you ever looked at the composition of Congress? I gave a talk at the Brookings Institute once, and I'm like, why do these guys care? And then I look at the audience, it was all old white men. They wanted me to help them not get old. I didn't do a good job. But it was not all bad, because they were paying attention and they really wanted to know, both for themselves and for others, how to not, they recognized we weren't going to stop aging, but they wanted to age well. And they were willing to sink a lot of money into it, which, in our world, that's good. Okay, some facts about aging. So for those of you who don't study aging, I just wanted to point out that aging is happening at different rates in different countries in different parts of the world. So you can see the two columns are 2005 and 2030. And, Europe is older than we are, but we're getting up there. And we really need to pay attention. Here, this tells you by country, and we're all pretty up there. The United States, in the one area, we're young. Italy is the old guys. For those of you who don't study this, I want you to see this this is very basic to people who do aging. This is and to demographers as well. This is the traditional population aging by population distribution by age. So it used to be those people up there, the oldest people, 85, there weren't very many of them. But now look. A lot more of them. And it really fundamentally shapes what we know, what we need to know, etc. Parallel to that is the changing structure of the family. So, the basics are the nuclear family. Everybody was part of a nuclear family. Really, you're not supposed to say everybody, but pretty much everybody. And there were those old spinsters, always the old ladies who nobody married, or who they would not marry or did not marry anybody, but mostly everybody married. So that was a lot of people. And you can see, even now, even though I know this graph pretty well, I'm always stunned. Look at the difference between 1970 and 2000. These are the people married without children, which we know there are more and more of those, other kind of families, singles, and other people who, non-family. My grandmother, as I look at this, I always have to remember my grandmother and grandfather, but I always think of it as my grandmother's house, even though he got to live there and pay for everything. They had a room in the house called the spare room, and in the spare room was a bedroom that in which an assortment of people, only men in my memory, sort of wandered through. They would come from Italy and they'd stay with them for a while. It was a spare room, and it was something they felt obliged to have. So family structures are very traditional. They're much less traditional. And as you all know, I think, either because you study this or because you live it, the changing structure of the family really changes how we live and the experience we have. Okay, so again, for those of you who don't study aging, we've come a long way in terms of what we know and think. So in the beginning, there was disengagement. There were three theories: disengagement theory, personality theory, and activity theory. And this stuff early came out of the Human Development Program College at the University of Chicago. Do you know? I forget if it was a program or a department, but department. A few of the classics like Bob Havinghurst and who was the woman? Bernice Newgarden. These were like, they came with this. The disengagement theory was the idea that people withdraw from society, which that sounds like a real downer, but they argued that people did it older people wanted to get done with society. They didn't want to be bothered anymore. I think I thought of it as an awful theory, but now I think there might be some truth to it, That doesn't sound good. But I mean, even if you know anything about Laura Carson's socio-emotional selectivity theory, you get older and you think, I don't have to put up with these jerks. I'm old and I don't need it. That's a variation on the disengagement theory. That's not exactly how they talk about it. But then there was a personality theory, which people varied in how they age by their personality. So, the people who had to interact with others when they were young and hated it, now they're old, they don't have to do it. And the reverse. And then activity theory, people who just like to be busy, and the best way to age would be to age with activity. I mean, you can imagine how simplistic this perspective is, but you get the idea. And the thing that was most common in aging models was a deficit model. There was never anything good about it. The older you got, the worse it got, which is why I want to end with this, which was the early, probably the most positive of the aging models, which was a unique contribution of Jack Rowe and Bob Kahn, our very own Bob Kahn. And I'd like to just say that one of the things Bob used to say is that I introduced him to aging. So they did good, or I did good, and they did good. They did better. But Jack was trained as a geriatrician back in the olden days when there weren't that many. And Bob Kahn was trained as a social psychologist. As I reminded Bob Groves when he talked about Bob Kahn, in the olden days, there was a joint program of a sociology, psychology program that trained social psychologists. And I thought, and still do think, it was a wonderful program because, especially for aging, because, aging is about the individual and about the context within which the individual lives. So this is a really important combination, but nobody asked me and they ended that joint program. But Bob was a graduate of that program. Bob, he wanted, if I remember correctly, and I could say anything because there's hardly anybody in the room who knows. But if I remember correctly, Bob wanted to be a sociology major. And he didn't get into the program. So his default option was this joint program. He was a great collaborator because he was initially an English teacher. So whenever you had to read the final draft, whatever Bob said was grammatically correct, I could go with. All right. Finally, I just want to put a plug in, which Jessica already did, and talk about the work that we do on social relations, convoys of support and successful aging at ISR. To give you a little history, this stuff doesn't start from nowhere. I'm pretty sure Bob would not like that sentence. But it's an evolving perspective. And at the time, people didn't want to talk about aging. So we had a study in the 80s called The Supports of the Elderly. It was the first study, and it was national, but it only had about 800 people to study what the experience, and it was called, the whole title of it was Supports of the Elderly Family, Friends, and Professionals, to get the big picture. And it was there that we developed the convoy measure, which, all of us who have developed measures will remember. It was the equivalent on the backs of an envelope. Actually, Angus Campbell told that story. That's how they got into the concept of well-being. I have 2 minutes left, and I think this is my last slide. So I'll tell you one thing about Angus. When I first came here, I came as a postdoc working with Libby Duvon, and I'm now the Libby Duvon Collegiate Professor. for that very reason. She's very formative. And Joe Veerhoff. But we started this study, and it was the first time people wanted to talk about older people. And then, why did I go to the 80s? Oh, because I did a postdoc, and that was in these early 80s. And I took a leave from my real job, which was at Syracuse, where I was a tenured professor. And I came here for 2 years. I'm still here. That was a few years ago. And then our first study was supports of the elderly, where we thought we could talk about, get representative data from, we could get data from a representative sample. That was pretty exciting. And then in the 1990s, we started this study, which is still ongoing, on social relations. And we started, this was the good part about Matilda Riley, because she was a life course, she wasn't a developmental psychologist, she was a life course sociologist. And this study was funded by NIA. And I remember talking to her and saying, you know, we sent it to NIMH because we didn't think NIA, the name being Aging, National Institute of Aging, would pay for it for 8-year-old data collection. And she was so indignant. She said, of course we would have paid for it. So then we went, after we had the first wave from NIMH, we went to NIA, and they have been funding it till this very day. We're in the field right now with the 4th wave. So now, in terms of aging research, which nobody even wanted to talk about when I first got here, I could tell you some sideline stories where people kind of told me I was ruining my career, which had not started, by studying aging. Now we are one of the world leaders in aging research. And I like to think I played maybe a little small part of it, but I'm really pleased to have been part of it. And to make him happy, I'm happy to say I'm done. I'll tell you a tidbit. You think about the question. When I was here as a postdoc on leave from my assistant professor job, I talked to Bob Kahn. Why? Did I know anything about Bob Kahn? Did I know what he did? Nothing. I just knew that his wife went to Hunter College. I went to Hunter College. I thought, he can't be all bad. And then Bob sent me, we were talking about something in my first grant, actually, and I wanted to use the well-being data. So Bob sent me, I mean, we're all in a little space, right? So he sends me down the hall to talk to Angus. I don't know, I mean, I don't think we can communicate, and none of the people who talked about him previously communicated what an intimidating fellow he was. I mean, I don't remember how tall he was, because everybody's taller than I am, but he had this big head and no hair and the deepest voice in the world. So I go in there to talk to him, and I'm literally scared to death. And I tell him why I'm there, and he said, so, you want to use my data? And what are you going to give me? Nothing. And how much will you pay me? Nothing. So then he smiles and says, okay. All right, any questions? What?
You guys are going to be up
Yeah.
on the panel, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, save your questions and ask all the hard questions of Linda and Ken. But I'll do these.
All right. So next we will have Dr. Linda Waite, who is the George Herbert Mead Distinguished Service Professor of Sociology, co-director of the Center for Aging Behaviors and Longitudinal Studies, Chabelis, and a senior fellow at NORC at the University of Chicago. She is the principal investigator of the NIA-funded National Social Life, Health, and Aging Project, NSHAP. The hallmark of NSHAP is its comprehensive approach to health and well-being at older ages. At the heart of this project is an ongoing nationally representative survey of community-dwelling older adults with data curated by NACDA at ICPSR. NSHAP has produced groundbreaking knowledge on the links between social relationships and physical, psychological, sensory, cognitive, and functional health. Dr. Waite is the recipient of a Merit Award from the National Institute on Aging, National Institutes of Health, and is an elected member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences.
I thank you all for being here. And I don't suppose I need to point out, but I'm one of the few people who's not at ISR. So I give you a perspective from a sister institution. One of the things I want to say following this morning's talk, one of the reasons I'm so proud to be a member of this community is how generous we are with our ideas, our data, the innovations, free use. You know, you never find in survey research, and I get emails all the time. We want to use your short loneliness scale. How do we do that? What do we have to pay? It's freeware. It's always freeware. We share innovations in data collection. We share new scales. We share, and I think it has allowed us to do the things that we've done. And it's one of the ways, many ways, that I'm really proud to be a member of this community. So I'm doing the present. I'm coming to you from the perspective of this survey that I've run for the last 20 years. So apologies, it's sort of a narrow perspective. These are just my opinions and ideas about what's going on now, the things that I think we've really accomplished, and a few challenges. Oh, I guess I'm done. I can see it there. What did I do? I clicked that one. Wasn't that it? There we go. Okay. Okay. So this was my remit to talk about now, and so I'll talk about now. I wanted to talk about a few ways that we as a community have changed. I want to talk about surveys generally. I want to talk about interdisciplinarity, especially toward medicine, technologies, genetics, and innovation in data collections and linkages. I'm going to do this really quickly, but I can talk about it all more. Surveys. I appreciate Bob Groves's history, but I think that the early surveys were all political, keep in touch with the electorate, blah, blah, blah. Now, and here's a little tidbit, when Ed Lauman and John Gagnon started the National Health and Social Life Survey, the sex study, there was a review, so it was the first nationally representative sample on sexuality. They produced 2 books, and there was a review in the New York Times book review, the New York Review of Books, by a biologist, Lewontin, who said, what is this? You can't tell anything by asking people. You know, you have to observe them like we do with frogs. Well, he was wrong. We were right. And now every time you get on a plane or go to the doctor or buy something from Amazon, they want you to fill out a survey, right? So we won. We all know we got when we were established, mostly public opinion, mostly political. Now we talk about everything. I mean, for heaven's sakes, we have people, pardon me, defecate in a box and send it in so we can do their microbiome. We're doing this all the time. We get vaginal swabs at EdShape. So, you know, many, many, many things. And we now have more ways to get surveys to respondents. So this morning before the session, I was talking to Bob Hummer, who runs Ad Health, and we've had this swapping back and forth relationship, which has just been wonderful. And one of the things we're finding is that if you can't get people in person, try remote. If you can't get people remotely, try in person or give them a phone number, but giving people, the same people, not all at once, but give them what you think they would be most likely to do, but then give them another option, we do much better. But this is new. I mean, we're just discovering this now at a current data collection, and he's seeing signs of it in ad health. Okay, so medicine. This is the experience from NCHAP. We have an older sample, obviously. When the first round of NCHAP, where we had a 1 hour mini medical exam in 2005, we sent papers to the Journal of the American Geriatric Society, and we got back reviews that said, what is this nationally representative sample stuff? Prove it. And, 20 years later, we get none of that. In fact, now we have medical students, residents, junior faculty in medicine coming to NCHAP because they want to study loneliness, and and you see it in the medical journals, social involvement and recovery from cardiac events. So I think, do I say that these walls have completely come down? No, but I think there is a big change toward the acceptance of the social sciences. Sociology is not part of the MCAT. You can't get any more social than that. And I think that we've seen a move toward inclusion of some of our measures in clinical screenings. The University of Chicago did an experiment doing a quick depression screen when you checked in, and then you were supposed to, if you screened in, they'd do the complete online depression scale, and then somebody would call you for an appointment. That was as a trial. I'm not sure what happened. I don't see that more recently. SOTA as a concept, social determinants of health, I think they've got it all wrong, but I appreciate the effort. I can talk to you more about that, but it's things like transportation, housing. Come on, that's not social. It's not just social, and completely ignoring the tough stuff that Toni talked about, which has to be included too. Okay. Also, we have included more medical measures, clinical, and now there are only 7,500 geriatricians in the country. So when Toni said there aren't very many, there aren't, and that's going to be a big problem in the future. The sorts of things that we're seeing in our field, from medicine to the social sciences, is we're measuring frailty. We're looking at health and society. That's a huge now, huge for the University of Chicago, undergraduate major, health and society. We're looking at things like physiological pathways from discrimination to cognition or other things. So the physiology is much more, we're incorporating it much more. And I think the medical community is listening to us. Okay, so new technologies. We're working on this, I'm sure everybody's working on this, but we have our sights on an adaptive cognition measure. We don't have it yet, but there's somebody on the faculty who's working on it. So with a couple of questions, you could get a cognitive measure. Fitness trackers, we've been doing this since 2010, where we give people accelerometers, and we get all sorts of data on things like sedentary behavior, sleep, exercise. Kate has run a study using smartphones to track locations and ask people how they're feeling in various locations. So you can link their geographic mobility to their social inclusion, to their feelings. I have a colleague who's a rhinologist who's planning a study of pollution in the home, using measures of pollution in the home. We use Google Street View to see what people's neighborhoods look like. All of this, I mean, it's only starting, but we probably always felt that way, right? That whatever was new, we're only getting started with it. Okay, we have moved to interdisciplinarity with new disciplines. We do a lot with NCHAP, with geriatrics, which is, we have 3 geriatricians on the project. And in a recent innovation in our data collection, we just lined them all up and said, what do you need? What do you want from your patients? And then we made it into survey measures. Now they're all on the team anyway, they all, but it's for aging research, it's just so important. And another reason why the Journal of the American Geriatric Society has become our best friend. Okay, oops, sorry. Genetics, we all know that, but we're just getting started on this too. Biology, I think this is the present. It's been the present for the last 15 or 20 years, but think about the earliest surveys and what we can get now. What we're able to get, what we want to get, what we understand. It's just been an amazing transformation. Physical functioning. I've come to believe that it's really, really an important component of aging. We've known about ADLs and IADLs and all of that, but there's more to it than that, because some of it's sensory functioning, which we're really just starting to appreciate. And I was hauled kicking and screaming into this by my colleague, Martha McClintock, on smell. It's turned out to be enormously, enormously important in ways I can tell you about. Studies are using fMRIs along with the social stuff. It's very expensive. It's hard to do, but it's an amazing technology. I'm not going to say so much about this. I'm running out of time, but we have a lot more ways to collect data. That's in the present. We have a lot more ways to link data. I heard a talk by Rob Warren about address linkages, prescription linkages. It's amazing what we can do. And of course, powerful new analytic techniques that are coming along all the time. Okay, here are the challenges just really quickly. Finding people. I got an email a week ago from a member of Ad Health saying they were seeing a pattern where the respondents, more than 1 or 2 of their respondents were saying, I'm dropping out of the study. I don't want to do this anymore. Your questions are too invasive. Now, that's a worry. I mean, it probably has to do something with the political issues we saw before. What was I thinking there? Getting agreement to provide data. Oh, we want people to let us link to Social Security or to their Medicare data. And I think that is a challenge. There are increasing concerns about data confidentiality. I think that might be the issue with the Ed Health experience. Here's a big one, recruiting and retaining field interviewers. That happened during COVID. I think if you think about what we're demanding from the interviewers now, they have to do finger stick blood. They have to walk somebody through a vaginal swab. They have to, this is really pretty advanced stuff. And we're flying the best interviewers all over the country. It needs to be more of a career. And I say this with the understanding it won't be a popular view. As survey research organizations, we should have one workforce. The ISR interviewers should work for NORC when we have work and they're available, and why not? And then representing the diversity of populations is a challenge because we've become lots more diverse. And these differences make a huge, if we want to understand the context, it's very different for different populations. And with the sample sizes we get, often we only get the largest groups and we can't differentiate them very much. So now I'm done. And Kimson said one question now, and then we'll do the whole thing. Hi, Jeff.
Jeff Alter from the medical school. I just want both Toni and you, what you guys have done is pretty amazing from my perspective.
So wonderful to hear.
Just to
You're not, I think the mic's not on, Jeff.
yeah, just to mention one example, as you probably know. Oh, was not. The National Academy of Medicine published 2 years ago the Global Roadmap for Healthy Longevity. If you haven't seen it or heard about it, it's online, get it. And it's all for what you guys have contributed. It's very heavily oriented and embraces the concepts of, maybe you don't like social determinants of health, but at least we've bought into it. And
it's a start.
It's there. It's a start, and it reflects what you guys have all been doing. So thank you.
I like those kinds of questions. Right, I noticed that.
I'm going to be presenting our last speaker, Dr. Ken Langa. Dr. Ken Langa is the Cyrus Sturgis Professor in the Department of Internal Medicine and at the Institute for Social Research. He's an Associate Director of the Institute of Gerontology at the University of Michigan. He's also the co-principal investigator and co-director of the Health and Retirement Study and principal investigator of the Harmonized Cognitive Assessment Protocol, also known as HCAP project, which we'll be hearing a little bit about today, both of which are funded by the National Institutes on Aging. Dr. Langa received an MD and PhD in public policy at the University of Chicago as a fellow in the Pew Program for Medicine, Arts, and the Social Sciences. He is a general internist and an elected member of the American Society for Clinical Investigation and an elected fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Dr. Langa's research focuses on epidemiology and costs of chronic disease in older adults, with an emphasis on Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. He has published more than 350 peer-reviewed articles on these topics and is currently studying population trends in dementia prevalence and the relationship of common cardiovascular risk factors to cognitive decline and dementia. On a personal note, Ken Langa was on my dissertation committee, and it is my pleasure to introduce him as a colleague and to discuss the future of aging research.
Thanks so much, Kate. It's an honor to be here for the ISR's 75th and to follow Toni and Linda, who are giants in the field, who I've been reading for about 20 years. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with them. My charge was to talk about the future. The quick warning that, that a lot of people say Yogi Berra said this. I'm pretty sure it was Niels Bohr, the physicist. But, anyway, so take what I say with a grain of salt. So I'm going to talk briefly about why study aging around the world. Why should we be doing that? Why should ISR be investing time and energy doing that? A theme of much of the last day and a half is that health in general, but healthy aging, we'll talk about specifically, is distributed very unequally in our country and around the world. I'll continue the love fest that Jessica Fall started for the Health and Retirement Study, and tell you a little bit more about that study, which we do here at ISR, and then again a little bit more about the brain and dementia, which has been my focus. So, and Toni and Linda sort of touched on this, but just to emphasize it again, why should we study aging around the world? The red line here is estimated number of older people, 65 and older around the world. Kind of the middle of the chart is where we are at 2025-ish, about 800 million elderly folks around the world, about to double over the next 25 years or so, up to about 1.6 billion. So a huge growth in the number of older people. The other really important part of this graph is the green line, which is the number of kids, the number of births in the world. During this time period, you can see that's not keeping up. So this growing difference between the number of older folks and kids and the size of families to provide care. So I'm biased, of course, but that to me is the most important public health and public policy issue we need to think about and address is, one, keeping older folks healthy and independent, but also for those who need help, as families become smaller, as the dependency ratio, the number of older folks to the number of kids becomes larger and larger. How are we going to address that? Families, social relationships, as Toni said, incredibly important here. And this growth is actually not balanced across the world, or won't be going forward. So the growth in the older population is going to be much greater. The rates of growth are going to be much greater in low and middle income countries. And by 2050, about 1/5 of the world's population will be over 60, and 80% of those people will be in low and middle income countries. So the high income countries, growth there, you can see, again, obviously, again, as Toni said, there'll be growth in high income countries. The green line is 85 and over, blue is 75, 65 for the red line. So you can see high income countries, some growth, but then in low income countries down in sort of the bottom right, you just see that because of age structure of the population, fertility rates, there'll be much greater growth in the older population in low and middle income countries. So we need more data from low and middle income countries. Translating that to, again, what I've been focusing on in terms of dementia and the number of individuals or older adults with dementia around the world. The red bar here showing growth in dementia, predicted growth in dementia cases over the next 25 years or so in low and middle income countries, about a tripling of the number of cases from 30 million-ish, I should say, up to 90 million. Again, growth in high income countries too, but at slower rates. So again, kind of increasing focus. I think we need to think about gathering more data in low and middle income countries. Here's an example of why families are so important in providing care to older adults and to people with dementia. Specifically, this is work led by Michael Hurd using, surprisingly, the Health and Retirement Study data that we collect. And this pie chart sort of shows the distribution of where the economic costs of dementia end up. And we found that the punchline, sort of about $50,000 per case of additional cost, economic impact for each person who has dementia. This is in 2010 dollars. That would be about $72,000 or so per case in 2024 dollars. So huge economic impact, about $200 billion in the United States then. But again, notice that fully half of that economic impact is simply the time that families spend providing care, just the informal care required to provide care to people with dementia. Another quarter in institutional long-term care in nursing homes. So again, the social support, the increasing strain on families as that huge number of, or as the number of older adults increases, seems to be really important, both to have data on and to think about from a policy perspective, how are we going to address that into the future. Thinking about disparities and data to to understand and address these. David Williams showed some data similar to this yesterday. Again, these are data from the Health and Retirement Study. A theme is developing here that shows life expectancy at age 50 in the United States. This is men, though the women's pattern looks similar. Green bars are my parents' generations, for the 1930, people born in 1930. The orange is my generation, 1960 cohort. I was born in 63. And what you can see here, and these are wealth quintiles going from poor to rich, left to right. Back in my parents' generation, you can see that there was some disparity in life expectancy at age 50, 27 years for the lowest quintile, 31.7 years again at expectancy at age 50. So about a 5-year gap in life expectancy by wealth. But then look what happens for my generation. The increased disparity goes from 26 years for the poorest individuals, 39 years, so 13-year life expectancy gap. So now what's going to happen in the next generation, the future? Again, I think that those are incredibly important data that we need to think about seeing both in the United States and other places around the world. Obviously, the COVID pandemic has exacerbated many of these differences in life expectancy, or at least the short-term effects. So again, I think the studies here at ISR and elsewhere following these issues, this disparity, sort of the most basic health outcome, right? Whether you're alive or not, extremely important. These are some data, again, from the Health and Retirement Study, looking at disparities in the risk for dementia in the United States for Black and white individuals between 2000 and 2016. And these, what this is showing is the ratio of Black to white dementia prevalence in the United States. And unfortunately, you can see that during 2016, there was basically very little change in the much greater risk for Blacks to have dementia than whites, almost sort of 1.7, 1.8. There has been some decline both for Black individuals and white individuals in the overall risk, age-specific risk of dementia during this time period in the US and other high-income countries, partly because of, likely because of increased education level across populations. But this disparity has persisted. There's also a interesting disparity, sex and gender disparity between dementia risk. Women seem to be at higher risk. This is sort of a meta-analysis from longitudinal studies around the world. This is a Kaplan-Meier curve. So down is bad here, less likely to be normal as you go down. So women at higher risk for dementia, lots of interesting work going on to try to sort that out. Some of it might be biological, much of it might be social in terms of education opportunities. Women also live longer, so sort of trying to understand that dynamic it will be quite important also. There's also abundant evidence from HRS and other studies around the world that in addition to being at higher risk for dementia, women bear a much greater burden of taking care of people with dementia. The ratio of female to male caregivers goes up and up as caregiving requirements go up. That's the sort of chart on the left, 2.5 to 1 times female to male ratio for people that need significant care. And then you can see much different risk for labor force disruptions for women compared to men on the right chart there in terms of needing to go from full-time to part-time work, leaving the labor force entirely. So much greater impact on women in the United States for caregiving related to dementia. So I will quickly plug the HRS. I don't need to do much because Jessica did much of this. In fact, I have some of the same bullet points that Jessica does. We're on the same same page here. Again, HRS has been going on since the early 1990s, created by Congress, as Jessica pointed out. There's 16 co-investigators, 8 of us here at the University of Michigan, 8 other wonderful colleagues around the country. NIA and Social Security Administration support it. We were recently renewed, as the provost mentioned yesterday. We learned the largest research grant in history, so it's a large enterprise. Jessica already mentioned all this, that we are nationally representative of folks over age 50 and follow them every couple of years. This is the just a sort of chart to show you the data collection, or how the sample has built up since starting in 1992. In 1998, we sort of filled in the age range, the gaps in age range that from prior waves, and been nationally representative since 1998, with it enrolling a new cohort, 51 to 56-year-olds every 6 years. I usually say I started working with the HRS in 1997 when I was 34 years old, and thought of it as this study of really old people, like people in their 50s. And now I'm 61, and I think of it as study of even young people, like people in their 50s. And I should also say I literally had on the 3rd floor of ISR had a meeting that quite literally changed my life and my career in terms of the work that I do. Met with Bob Willis, who was then the PI of the HRS, Regular Herzog, who was a psychologist, sort of who started up the HRS and was a mentor, and sadly passed away in 2001. And Bill Rogers, one of the original folks, and we talked about this new sub-study on dementia that NIA wanted us to do, and I'm still doing the same thing 27 years later. So an incredible opportunity to work with folks at ISR from that great early group. Won't talk much about this again. Jessica mentioned lots of this. Jessica has led lots of the biomarker and genetics data collection that has increased significantly since 2006. Cognitive testing in the core survey was an innovation, again, that Regular Herzog was very much the lead on, and Bob Wallace, our colleague down at the University of Iowa. I left out a slide where I talk about our new data collection, geographically related data collection, pollution, and characteristics of neighborhoods. The exposome is the new word that the scientific community talks about, and that's another innovation, both on the HRS and other studies too. The international growth of the HRS network has been an incredibly fun and fascinating thing to participate in over the last 25 years or so, with Jessica and others. David Weir, who's been the PI for the last 17 years until I joined him this year. Low and middle income countries is a focus of many of the studies, Mexico, Brazil, China, India, and NIA is trying to invest more in those data that I was arguing are extremely important given the growth in the older population there in low and middle income countries. Kate mentioned the HCAP has been our dementia sub-study that started in 2016, has also grown in a number of the studies in the HRS International Network. So collecting more and more cognitive and cognitive decline data in these countries, which again, I would argue extremely important. And again, NIA very much encouraging and investing in low and middle income countries. You can see some of the countries that have either been funded or submitting applications to grow the HCAP and the HRS network around the world. Just to give you a flavor of some of the types of studies that are now possible, comparing data from high income and low and middle income countries. Much of this work led by Lindsay Kobayashi, a colleague at basically the School of Public Health, who's now a co-investigator with us on the HRS, looking at sort of variation across countries in how occupation, education, negative wealth shocks might affect cognition and perhaps vary across countries, perhaps due to differences in policies and family structure and things like that. Just to focus in on one specific study, this is by T.C. Cho, who's a PhD student of Lindsay's at the School of Public Health. She's used these harmonized data across the HCAP network to look at the negative impact of a big wealth shock, sort of 75% of your wealth, just you losing 75% of your wealth within a few year period, and how might that affect one's long-term cognition. She did find, again, using these harmonized measures that have been developed for across the entire HCAP network, that in the US and China, it does appear that a wealth shock is associated with a significant long-term decrement in your overall cognitive function. Not as much, not significant in Mexico and England, and sort of, again, interesting hypothesis generating studies, I would say, to try and unpack why might that vary across country. And then finally, I mentioned some of the geographic and exposome data that we're collecting on the HRS now. This is a relatively recent study from Boya Zhang, who's recently got her PhD at the School of Public Health here, looking at different kinds of air pollution across the United States and exposure to air pollution and how that might affect brains and health in general. Found that pollution, especially related to agriculture and wildfires, seem to increase the risk for incident dementia. Climate change going into the future, I think will be a huge important focus of how pollution, weather changes for those of you like myself who have an older parent in Florida and the recent hurricanes, just sort of understanding how those kinds of storms affect long-term well-being of older folks, and how families deal with those, what seem like they will be increasing number of storms related to climate change, I think will be another important aspect into the future. So the future is an aging world, especially in low and middle income countries. Expanding comprehensive data collection on aging in low and middle income countries will be critical, I think, for a fuller understanding of how to promote healthy aging, the Rowan Kahn model of successful aging that Toni mentioned, and decrease disparities in healthy aging in countries around the world, which I think should be a major focus of our work, is understanding and addressing these huge disparities both in the United States and elsewhere. And ISR will continue to be a leader in collecting and distributing these kinds of data to support the future of aging research. Thanks.
We're going to invite our panelists to come up for a few questions that I will pose, but then we will open it up to the audience for any questions that can be directed to the panelists. Guess what? While everyone's getting situated here, I just want to, if we could extend a round of applause for all of our speakers today. I'm going to start by posing a question to each of our panelists. These are some sort of thought questions, big picture questions, some of which have been touched on today, but others are just ones that are for fodder, and we'd love to just get your kind of big picture ideas on these questions. So the first is for Toni. What are the most important lessons from the past that can inform aging research in the future? If there's one or maybe two mistakes that we've made that can inform our work as we move forward.
Well, one thing I would say is don't give up, because when I started, nobody wanted to talk about aging. And like I said when I began my comments, I did a master's thesis in aging. So I've been at this a long time, but there's been a lot of resistance to studying aging because, like I said, people thought it might be catchy. So one thing I would say is, and same thing with life course perspective or the lifespan perspective. People didn't want to talk about things like that. They just wanted a kind of 2x2 approach, just a couple of variables and look at the regression, or maybe the ANOVA. Come a long way. And I think if you're passionate about it, you should stay with it. That would be one of my lessons. And the other thing is, if you're someplace like the University of Michigan, it's a very big place. Somewhere, there's somebody who's interested in the same thing you are. Find them.
In order here, so one question for the past, now for the present to Linda. So Linda, you kind of touched upon this, alluded a little to, about the need to vary our approaches to surveying respondents. But of course, I think sort of a drumbeat that we've heard throughout our symposium, and definitely has been a constant source of conversation here at ISR and SRC, is dwindling response rates. So I'm curious, can you touch upon what are the ways in which we need to be adapting to the fact that response rates are dwindling? Maybe you perhaps can speak from the perspective of NCHAP and what you all are doing there.
So I think what we found is that it helps a lot to give people options. What we do is guess who's going to be a good web respondent, blah, blah. The other thing that we've done, and this is with an aging panel, so people die, people become too infirm to be interviewed. In this round of data collection, we're just closing the end of the month. We very much expanded our informant interview. So we're getting a lot of information from that person, and that's been very successful. And I think we're still working on this, that we're going to count them as full interviews. So that's one thing we just tried that's worked really well. Now that I'm not sure on a younger sample how you would do that, but I bet we could figure out ways to find out key information from, say, an adolescent or a young adult from. The other thing that we've done just this time is we developed the minimal respondent interview. I think NIH, certainly NIA, has been pushing us toward that, but 5 minutes. So we go to the door, somebody says, no, I just don't have time, I can't do it. And the interviewers say, could I just have 5 minutes of your time? And then I have to look to see what we actually asked. But we're hoping, one, we can figure out what's going on for people, but two, that if they do that, the next time, they'll be more likely to respond with a full interview. So. But he's got the thing.
I asked during her dissertation.
Okay, but I do have a little bit of an off-the-wall question here, and not as revenge for my dissertation. So Ken, and I'm curious, maybe you can speak to HRS in particular around the role of AI in survey research. What are the advantages and disadvantages of AI? What do we need to be thinking about as we look towards the future?
Hand this over to Jessica, the hard questions here. We have been talking a lot and thinking a lot about this, partly from the, and I should say, I don't think I'm definitely not an expert in AI or understand all of this, but there are sort of growing concerns just about, as the theme of the last day and a half, we make our data public and share, as Linda said. What happens when people sort of use AI on public data, sort of in an analytic way? And again, I'm not even sure I understand exactly all what's going on here, but in terms of learning from these data that then get spread out and used in ways that we don't understand or don't expect. So I think there's interesting, and our colleagues at NIA and elsewhere are obviously very interested in this question. Will the confidentiality of our study respondents isn't endangered in some way by these new technologies? And I don't have the answer to that, but we've certainly been talking a lot about it, and will we have to address that? I mean, I certainly think, putting together large data sets with lots of different kinds of data, and for instance, in the world I am, both sort of clinically and in the research side, and coming up with a diagnosis, is this person in the group or not? Are they a case or not? AI is very well suited to putting together, again, lots of different kind of data you wouldn't even think might provide some information about whether someone is in or out of whatever classification you want to make. It doesn't have to be a medical diagnosis, but I think there's fascinating work around that, including potential biases, racial biases. If you sort of collect data that are in some ways, there's biases inherent in the data, then it gets propagated into your results too. So I'll stop there. It's obviously going to affect all of our work, and it will be fascinating to see how that happens over the next decade or two.
I'm going to place the mic here and open the Q&A up to any audience members who would like to come up and ask a question. Or I can bring the mic to you.
Hi. Whoops. Okay, so I'd like to this is a general question for the panel, right? So going back to the 1960s, so that slide that Toni started off with, right? I think we started off, and I can say we because I was part of it, in the deficit model, right? So, and then there was the pendulum swing, and it became successful aging. Productive aging was another one, right? Active aging, that was also against the disengagement model. And now I'm seeing that we're going back to the deficit model again, because we get the epidemic of dementia, right? Cognitive decline, it's all gloom and doom, frailty. So how do we, and also I guess if you look at the demographic literature in terms of a decreasing, well, there's less optimism about longevity, right? Coming up, there's a new article I just read in Nature, I think, this week. So, so to what extent, did we push it too far in terms of the optimism, and now this is a rejection of that? And how do you get back again to being somewhere in between, because there's a large variation, right?
So I think that part very short. I can never see anybody back. That there are two perspectives here. One is societal, at least. One is the societal population perspective, and the other is the perspective of the individual. So as a society, when we have now Alzheimer's is the 6th leading cause of death, Ken pointed out that the social and economic costs are enormous, but everybody's not going to get Alzheimer's disease. But so as a society, we have to prepare, and as individuals, we have to consider the possibility, but there's huge variation. And so worrying about the deficits, I think, is a societal level problem. And thinking about how you can do it well is an individual perspective.
And I can just add a comment. Just because I also am short, we had a conversation about that. I've been short a long time.
Shorter than I am.
Well, I have higher heels on. But it's okay. I'm comfortable with being short. Yeah, we've been that way a long time. We had a chance to get used to it. One of the things.
Short people live long.
There you go. And you could tell, because I'm really old. One of the things that's tricky is that, we want to fund this research, and often the funding goes towards a deficit model, right? But what I've taken to doing is a workaround is kind of to talk about risk and resilience. So what makes you more susceptible and what prevents you kind of beating the odds?
Thank you very much for your very nice presentations. I was really struck, Ken, with that graph you put up of age and gender and dementia. And you mentioned the enormous gender difference. And I was similarly struck with what looked like a enormous age difference. That the curve of dementia, or I guess the cumulative extent of dementia, looks like it goes rather rapidly at some point, and then it flattens out, if I read that graph right. Could you say more about this age pattern of dementia, Alzheimer's, the whole, I couldn't see from the back when that curve came down, Kaplan-Meier curve came down and flattened out. Can you say more about that? I'm intrigued.
Sure. Complicated strands there. One, Arlen, I think is simply competing risks of mortality. So you have to live long enough in order to get to the age when dementia risk increases. So for one, women have longer life expectancy, so they have more time, so to speak, to have cognitive decline that's severe enough to mention. But again, it's newer studies think even sort of adjusting for life expectancy and mortality risk, women seem to be at higher risk for dementia. Sort of 75 or so is where I think that steep decline that you noticed that's where dementia incidence really takes off. Again, there's lots of work in this area. One, again, is sort of educational differences, social differences, and all the work that both Toni and Linda have done, and differences for men and women in our country and other countries around the world. But again, there's questions of hormonal differences, biological differences in terms of risk also. So it's really quite an active area.
So I'm going to just pile on that a little bit. We are poised to see, I think, big cohort changes because one of the strongest predictors of Alzheimer's and dementia, other than age, which is the strongest, is education. And the cohorts that are coming in have substantially higher levels of education. So, and that includes women. So in the past, women were disadvantaged more in educational attainment, and that is changing in the current. The other thing is to point out, you have to not die of cancer, not die of heart disease, which are the two leading causes of death, to get to the age where you're at risk of dementia. And we've made a lot of progress in those. So this is a sort of an expected concept. Something is going to kill you, right? And
one other to build on what Linda said, the differences in educational change and cohort differences in educational attainment vary quite widely across the world. So another reason to collect these kinds of data in countries around the world, including low and middle income countries, is that in the U.S. much of the decline in dementia risk over the last 25 years is related to increases in education, but younger cohorts, we sort of run out of that in the United States, whereas in other countries around the world, there is this increase in educational attainment and
I have a question about how progress is made on a statistical basis. And it's always kind of way over my head. Coming from medicine with Holy Grail is randomized clinical trials, which are becoming harder and harder to actually do. And a very well-defined question is drug X to cognitive function in population by a very narrow good to have it on. So, in the social sciences, you made great progress in taking population data and help us understand. Are we able to kind of substitute for this kind of very rigid medical model of research and advance our understanding from what you guys can get from people? Does that make any sense?
Let me just say yes.
Yeah, you're 50 now.
Jeff, I mean, one, again, from my perspective, one advantage of longitudinal studies like the study to have a bit better, a longer term understanding of sort of people's trajectories into what happened before. Is it truly that's causing this long-term thought in a broader way than the clinical trial? For instance, that the study that you showed, that I shared with all, it appears that shock to your wealth affects your cognition long term. There's also obviously reverse causality as people's cognition declines. It affects their wealth that way. Scams or other decisions or things like that. So longitudinal studies, you can never get away from that potential risk 100%, but having these kinds of long-term data allows you to do a little bit better job of drawing inferences around what's possible.
So just on that point, there's been some recent research that one of the early predictors of incident Alzheimer's or cognitive decline is your credit score. So, which suggests that, well, so when your credit score goes down, then that's suggestive of cognitive changes that would affect your wealth.
I know this has been a very lively and dynamic conversation, but we're falling behind on our schedule. And we also have to reset this room for an event this afternoon. So please join me in welcoming and thanking the panel for their discussion.